How you doing? This is Mike from Mike's Train of Thought. So this is just off the top, and what we're going to be discussing is how human traffickers and organized crime criminals, they're using the internet and artificial intelligence, and some of the dangers that presents, and how a lot of people don't realize what those dangers actually are. Now, as many of you know, I've spent many years posting and blogging about human trafficking, organ trafficking, and other types of out there crimes like that. That's brought me to different areas of the internet where exploration and your wonder is not just an idea. It's actually being packaged and sold to many people, like thousands of people and viewers in real time, all at the same time. Now, I know it's easy for us to dismiss campsites that host amateur content, adult content, as harmless, as people just trying to make ends meet. However, if you start digging through court filings and listening to survivor interviews and tracking the networks that connect the different criminals, I've actually learned the truth, okay? That these platforms are actual pipelines to human traffickers and organized crime criminals. Now, there's one case that constantly comes back to my mind when I think about these type of crimes. And that's a young girl who was underage, who was being trafficked across multiple different adult platforms at one time. Her abuse, it was not subtle. It was live streamed, people, in real time. And it was labeled as lesbian amateurs, as if that masked the crime itself. Now, in one segment of the video, an older woman yanks this poor girl by her hair and then slaps her. And when she does, it was so hard that you could see the impact on her face, and she fell forward towards the camera. Now, at one point, she leaned in close enough to where you could actually read the words coming out of her lips. And those words that viewers saw and ignored was, "This is not a game. It's not an act." And it was at that point that the young girl endured more physical abuse. Massive more physical abuse. Now, that stream had over 5,000 viewers in real time. And even afterwards, it had tens of thousands more that saw it and reshared it to other adult cam sites and porn sites in general. Some of the viewers reportedly convinced themselves that it was BDSM or roleplay to make money. But see, here's the problem, people. You see what you want to see. And the internet, it actually allows that blindness on a massive scale. See, the legal system, though, is starting to catch up. In the United States, Pornhub, which is the parent company of MindGeek, now renamed AYLO, AYLO, has entered a deferred prosecution agreement back in 2025 that the company paid $1.8 million in an ongoing compliance oversight and promised more structural changes to moderation practices after federal investigators actually found that child sex abuse material had been distributed, sold, and viewed multiple times and monetized across its platforms. Now, mind you, that case was not a press release, nor was it a PR stunt, but it was a federal recognition that the platforms profited from human trafficking directly, and how those platforms failed to prevent it. Now, at the same time, survivors have pushed civil suits that put corporate practices under new scrutiny. Now, one prominent example is Fleet versus MindGeek. Now, that case had brought up many questions about Visa's responsibility in processing the payments for adult platforms that were hosting human trafficking crimes that actually profited between the site and the users and different multiple parties. Now, a federal judge initially allowed the case to move forward, highlighting, right, a critical point that financial intermediaries are not just neutral conductees when they knowingly allow human trafficking and sexual abuse profits from that to flow freely on their sites. Now, court documents show a pattern of corporate awareness and inaction to follow through on anything about it. See, these lawsuits, though, they're very important. That not only for the victims to get restitution for their crimes that they went through, but to also forcing the broader tech ecosystem to reckon with accountability for their inactions. Now, let's look at another one. Then there's the Girls That Do Porn, a name that became sleuth for exploitation, disguised as amateur adult content again. Over 40 women have sued MindGeek, alleging that the company profited from coerced videos filmed with false pretenses. Federal authorities ultimately charged the operation founder and civil suits that followed. While some settlements have confidential agreements to them, the court records reveal a pattern that women were recruited under deceptive circumstances, pressured to perform, and then pressured to be monetized across multiple different platforms at the same time. That story, that's not just abstract, it is actually documented, criminal, and financially reliable. Now, regulatory changes have started a ripple outward. In June of 2025, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the Texas HB 1181, which was a law that required porn sites to verify the age of viewers before accessing any type of material. Now, this is not a minor procedural tweak, mind you. It is a legal acknowledgement that minors can and do access adult content, and that the platforms have a responsibility themselves to stop them. Now, the ruling set precedent for other states to create similar leverage for regulators to enforce age verification laws and forcing platforms to consider the real cost of ignoring underage access. And that also includes for victims. Now, get the legal victories are only part of the story, though, okay? The people who watch or fail to act compound this harm to continue. Thousands of viewers have convinced themselves that they were not watching or witnessing abuse. This shows a massive desensitization for. I'm trying to think of the right way to put this. This just shows that people's lack of care for one another matters because it fuels demand, and demand is the engine of exploration, of course, okay? So the fact that they're desensitized to such violent and cruel sexual abuse that they consider that normal, that's just adding fuel to it, is what I was trying to say. Now, technology may lower the barrier, however, to entry for traffickers, but the human behavior keeps this system running. Now, trafficking rarely actually begins on an adult campsite. It actually starts in general online apps, where teens and young adults, they already spend majority of their time. Messaging platforms, gaming networks, social media. According to reports from Polaris, which runs the U.S. National Human Trafficking Hotline and the UNDOC, they describe a pattern that's ongoing of grooming and isolation and coercion that moves victims in familiar digital spaces into exploitative operations. Now, during the pandemic, recruiters found new opportunities as teens spent more time online. They were being isolated from school and community in general. Their support basically fell through. The grooming can actually start off subtle. Flattery, promises of work or attention, early exposure to sexualized material, and then escalation into trafficking, coercion, and then abuse. There is like a whole pattern that they do. Now, artificial intelligence now is changing the whole landscape in an alarming way. Traffickers now are using AI-generated imagery to create realistic depictions of victims, or to manufacture deepfake content of different individuals, random individuals at that. These materials are then used for blackmail or to stimulate demand on adult platforms, meaning that they're selling them back and forth to one another on different adult platforms. Now, in 2024, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, reported millions of cyber tip line submissions with a growing proportion flagged AI manipulated content. The trend is starting to become global. Organizations like the Internet Watch Foundation have documented increases in AI-generated abuse material in the United Kingdom, and the U.S. law enforcement continues to monitor similar platforms as they come out. Now, the consequences of victims are profound. Survivors endure long-term mental health impacts, which can include PTSD, depression, anxiety, substance use disorders, and physical injuries from prolonged abuse or to themselves. Now, peer-reviewed studies consistently highlight the high prevalence of chronic pain, sexually transmitted infections, and psychological traumas among human trafficking survivors. Escaping the system is rarely the end, though. The medical and therapeutic support are critical, but often they're insufficient. Programs exist, but these programs are way underfunded, and they're overstretched. Survivor lives are permanently shaped by exploration and the use of pre-portrait, and it's not just the survivors, okay? Content moderators often are underpaid and contracted at that. You heard that right. If they get big enough, they will be contracted. Now, overseas, severe mental health consequences, okay? I meant they face severe health consequences. In Kenya, over 140 moderators sued Meta and its contractor, SAMA, S-A-M-A, claiming that PTSD and other mental health harms from daily exposure to numerous graphic abuse. A Kenyan court recently has ruled that Meta can be held accountable in Kenya. Now, this decision, with wide implications for international labor laws and platform responsibility. These moderators are often the first line of defense against online exploitation. Yet they bear the psychological weight of the exposure without adequate support, because meaning that they're just overlooking a crime. Now, the exploitation of limited to sex trafficking, organ trafficking is increasing as well. Documented in court records, in 2023, a UK jury convinced former Nigerian Senator Ike Ikeremeadu, Ekeweremadu, his wife and doctor for arranging the illegal harvest of a kidney from a vulnerable young man. Now, across South Asia, authorities continue to dismantle kidney trafficking operations that prey on the poverty and the misinformation. Now, court records show that operations are systematic and financially driven, often connected to a broader criminal networks, meaning organized crime networks, that do kidnapping for ransom intersects with trafficking and extortation, creating a complex web of crime that exploits fear and financial desperation. Now, federal prosecutors in Texas have charged defendants involved in schemes where migrants were being held abused, and filmed for proof of life, and extorted for payments. These are not isolated incidences, meaning just one here and there. NGO has been mapping, and it shows patterns of ransom demands that tie to be perceived victim wealth or geographic location. Modern criminal networks have weaponized technology and artificial intelligence to streamline coordination and enforce intimidation and collect payments rapidly. They don't have to wait as long as what they used to, as many of you know. Now, platform regulators and law enforcement are caught in a constant tug of war with traffickers. Financial moderating in one lever, card networks, payments processors, and advertising intermediaries are now being held to the account when they process money linked to trafficking. Now, legal cases like Visa versus MindGeek have forced public discussion finally of these mechanisms. Now, compliance monitoring, while it may not be like foolproof, it represents a practical pathway to reduce the harm. Now, preventing across the minors in part of the solution. Okay, let's look at this. So, Texas age verification law expensify. Texas age verification law has added an approach. However, experts caution that the system must protect privacy to avoid creating large data sets that could be hacked, and ensure enforcement does not simply push underage users towards VPN or foreign platforms. Now, where did I put that in? Now, interventions are only ineffective and they reduce risk without creating harm. Now, ultimately, what has emerged from research, court records, and survivor accounts is a system that has been failed by human behavior, technology, and profit. Traffickers use the very tools being designed for convenience, messaging, streaming, payment to operate on a scale. Now, platforms profit when the distribution are anonymous. Payments meet human curiosity, after all. And desensitization. Court legislators and investigators are now catching up, however, as I was saying earlier. But survivors carry the deepest enduring cost of them all. Really, though, I mean, think about it. In the evolving landscape that we're talking about here, in question stands out. Whose freedom actually matters? The freedom of adults to consume unverified adult content, or the freedom of minors to grow up without blackmail, coercion, or exploitation? Supreme Court rulings, criminal convictions, and civil statements suggest, you all ready for that one? That the legal system is beginning to answer that very question. But the answer is far from complete. The states are global, and the technology and accelerations that the technology is growing, and the human cost still remains enormous. Now, the way that the victims enter these networks often follow a predictable pattern. Even though each story fails a chaotic form from the inside. Now, it usually begins with grooming, the slow coercing of trust and dependence. Recruiters often, go to peers or slightly older acquaintances to start by offering attention, gifts, or a promise of money. Sometimes it is framed by a modeling or entertainment network. To, work photo shoots, campsites, social media influencer opportunities is how they sell it. They're not telling you what to do on these campsites. Sometimes they'll actually tell them, and you'll see this sometimes, by the way, they'll actually allow them to be dressed for a while to allow them to get used to the streaming. And then it goes into what they ultimately want, which is human trafficking and being forced to do whatever they have to do. Now, the target, however, they rarely know that they are actually being used in this way or exploited. They actually believe that they're doing everything the correct way and it's all legit on the up and up because that's how it'll appear to them. Like, again, these organized criminals are intelligent and they're using all of this new software. So Polaris, again, which runs the U.S. National Human Trafficking Hotline and the UNDOC, have documented these platforms in detail. Now, recruiters isolate the victims, cut them off from family and friends, and slowly start to normalize small acts of sexual compromise. The first step might be sharing, suggestive photos on Instagram, and then quickly onto more sexualized photos onto other sites. Next, they'll suggest doing a live video, similar, the same way, either on social media sites or a basic one, and then they'll have them do a nude one. Okay, and then they'll start to do a private stream and often lure them with a masked type of opportunity. Survivors describe feeling basically completely flattered, and at first, and then they felt trapped, they entirely dependent. It is a psychological warfare, really. Isolation with shame, fear, and subtle incentives. Gifts, protection, and the illusion of a potential career make resistance to it much harder for a lot of these females, especially ones from third world nations. Okay, so when you're seeing the third world nation ones pop up, a lot of those girls are actually being human trafficked. They're actual human slaves, essentially. Now, once someone is trapped, the exploitation escalates. Survivors describe being broken in, normally with drugs, threats, or physical abuse. One survivor was later testified in federal court, described being given cocaine to relax before her first film scene, and then threatened with exposure to her family if she refused to participate any farther after the cocaine. The pattern, it actually began to repeat itself until the victim basically internalizes the coercion as a normal part of the job. Pimps or human traffickers often present themselves as the only source of stability for the victims. Someone providing the food, the shelter, the protection, and the symbolic form of caring for them. The manipulation is so effective on the victims that some survivors actually continue to defend the abusers for years later after the abuse. Now, after the initial control phase, the human traffickers often move victims to commercialized exploitation, cam work, escort sites, or subscription-based adult platforms. Unlike the glamour or adult entertainment promoted social media, these assignments are controlled, monitored, and enforced by the human traffickers. Survivors are often confined to rooms with very little privacy, subjected to repeated abuse, and pressured to meet quotas for the online content that they're producing. Now, the economics of exploitation are explicit on the dark web. Marketplaces, adult networks sell access to victims in tiered pricing structured, okay? And what I meant, tiered pricing structured. The most marketable targets commands thousands per session. These are the less fresh or less preventable, may be passed from operator to operator. In some regions, trafficking networks operate in hierarchical structures reminiscent of corporate chains with top-level handlers insulated from direct contact with the victims, and lower-level recruiters acting as the people in between them. Okay, so what that means is they go to an office and it looks like an up-and-up, legit type of business. Suit, secretary, the whole nine. It'll look like a legit office. Then after that, they only deal with the person going back and forth between the big-time actual person profiting, and so on and so on, just like any other organized criminal organization. Now, court documents have, from federal indictments in California, New York, and Texas, have confirmed that these structures exist And like I was saying, they're financially organized. Now, artificial intelligence has been added to a larger ecosystem. Deepfake content had generative avatars and AI-driven communication. Bots have become tools for human traffickers to expand, reach, and manipulate both victims, their families, and clients. In some documented cases, human traffickers have used artificial intelligence to generate convincing depictions of minors and adults in coerced into participation, and then they use for extortion or advertising purposes. Reports from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the Internet Watch Foundation indicate that AI-generated sexual abuse material, get ready for this, folks, has now surged by over 60% between 2023 and 2024. And what was going on between all that? COVID was going on between all that. And I talked about that a while back in my other human trafficking episodes. So this technology has allowed criminals to produce infinitive, just non-stop, there's no end, to adult content with very minimum effort while masking the real-world sexual abuse and complicating the detection and persecution of the criminals because they can manipulate it. Social media recruitment remains a major driver and factor, however. Platforms designed for connection, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Facebook, Discord, has become entry points for human traffickers. Research has showed that recruiters exploit their algorithms to target vulnerable users, teens who post about running away, seeking employment, or experiencing social isolation are approached under the guise of mentorship or career opportunity. Again, that's why they say you got to be careful about what you post on the internet, because that's what they're using to find their victims. They look at their post. So once communication is established, traffickers often escalate gradually, employing psychological manipulation, threats, or bribery. Now, studies from the Department of Justice and NGO field reports suggest that nearly 70% of all identified cases involve initial contact via mainstream social media. Now, courts are increasingly documenting the overlap between online recruitment, live streaming platforms, and traditional human trafficking operations. For example, federal indictments in New York in 2023 described that human traffickers who use social media to groom teenagers moved them to cam operations in New Jersey and then monetized these videos through subscription-based adult platforms. Now, these indictments included chat logs, financial records, and testimony from survivors that detail the systematic exploitation. These cases are critical because they demonstrate how large this problem actually is. Not just in content moderation, it is in criminal organization and is being amplified in profits by technology. Now, it's being amplified really by technology in all the different areas. Now, physical and mental health consequences from this, again, are severe and they're very long-lasting. Trafficking survivors frequently suffer from complex PTSD, chronic pain, substance dependency, sexually transmitted diseases, and severe anxiety or depression or sleep pattern problems. Now, peer-reviewed studies have confirmed that these health impacts persist long after escaping, often requiring years of therapy and medical care. The trauma is compounded by social isolation. Many survivors are estranged from their family, distrust the authorities, and lack stable housing or stable employment. A 2022 study in BMC Public Health Control found that 80% of adult survivors of sexual trafficking in the United States reported ongoing mental health struggles up to 5 years after their exit. And this actually illustrates the enduring impact of the crime itself. They suffer for even more years than that, by the way, as well. Even those tasked with policing content online, they're affected as well. Content moderators in the United States, Europe, and Africa have reported severe psychological harm from exposure to child sexual abuse material, sexualized violence, and exploitation footage, meaning where they get rough and they make it look like they're forcing them to do it, but it's BDSM style or whatever. Now, litigation in Kenya against Meta and its contractors have highlighted PTSD, anxiety, and depression among the moderators, while some which are fired from or denied support. Courts are now recognizing the human cost of this labor, which sits at the intersection of technology and exploitation, profiting these workers and not just ancillary, it's essential to preventing further harm. Financial networks also play a critical role in this. Platform monetization, payment processors, and advertising revenue sustain the trafficking economy. Court cases like Visa versus MindGeek that we discussed earlier and civil statements with ALO demonstrate that tracing payments and holding the administrations accountable is a practical lever to distress the exploitation, financial on-site, and not just regulatory. It reduces the account of trafficking, the scale of operations, experts recommended, a combination of age verification, financial transparency, and algorithm oversight to mitigate the harm. Okay? It's a lot of stuff to take in, I know. All of that stuff is actually really good. Just give me a minute and we'll go into all that. But I gotta get through this first. So, organ trafficking adds another larger scale of concern. In 2023, the UK prosecution of Ike versus Akaramadu, EKWEREMADU, and associates confirmed that illegal harvesting of a kidney from a vulnerable individual. Now, across South Asia, similar operations have been documented, exploiting the poverty and depiction of using people from poverty, third world nations. Now, these cases have been prosecuted in courts with detailed records illustrating a network global problem where human beings are commodified. I'm trying to think of the word I wrote, what that meant. Trafficking in these instances is not sexualized. It is calculated financial exploitation that overlaps with the broader criminal networks. Now, kidnapping, ransom, and extortion intersects with these type of abuses. In Texas, prosecutors have documented that cases where migrants were abducted, abused, filmed for proof of life, and extorted through digital payment systems. Now, NGO reports that these schemes are not random. Victims are being targeted based on their perceived wealth and their social connections, or their geographic location. Technology has enabled rapid coordination, messaging, and payment opportunities, which have lowered the barrier for human trafficking for exploitation while amplifying that risk at the same time. Now, legal interventions, while critical, are only part of the solution. Policy experts stress that age verification, financial audits, and content moderation must be paired with survivor support, trauma-informed care, and social recognition programs. Now, without these measures, survivors face an ongoing harm, and human traffickers can continue operations through less visible channels via dark web or other adult platforms. Now, despite these challenges, progress still exists. Federal and state courts are increasingly holding platforms accountable. Survivors are now using legal mechanisms to recover damages. And NGO are documenting exploitation with unprecedented rigor. Now, age verification laws are deferred prosecution agreements, and high-profile convictions are all part of the legal and social ecosystem, slowly tightening around the human trafficking networks. Technology accelerates abuse, but it can also be harnessed for protection and investigations and prevention later on. Now, as a blogger, watching the system unfold, it's both frustrating and clarifying at the same time. Frustrating because the networks are so sophisticated, global, and they're being adaptive. Like, they're very, very well, they adapt very well to new type of technology. Now, which this is clearing, this is clarifying, though, because the solutions are actually increasingly visible. If you follow the money, as so many of us have stated over the years, protect the survivors and hold the intermediate parties accountable, meaning the middle people, and demand structural changes from the platforms hosting the videos of the human trafficking and sexual abuse survivors, this shows progress every single day. And it also shows that these human traffickers use these sites every single day. Now, when I speak to experts, right, investigators and survivors, one theme constantly will reemerge. That technology does not create human trafficking. People create human trafficking. Very similar to the gun thing, kind of think about it. But technology does not amplify the harm. It hides the crime and allows the abuser to operate at a scale. Now, legal system advocates and informed public policies are the levers that we need to basically push back. Survivors deserve more than what they have done so far. They deserve structural change that actually prevents further exploitation and supports actual recovery. Like, they deserve stricter adult content access. Survivors themselves provide the clearest insight into how these networks actually operate and what it takes to actually dismantle them. In interviews available in court testimony and public advocacy statements, they described the nuanced manipulation that kept them actually trapped. The combination of flattery, gifts in isolation, and the constant reminder of refusing what would lead to worse outcomes if they did not participate. One survivor, now working with a nonprofit advocacy group, has told a federal judge that her trafficker made me feel like the only way out was complete obedience. And even then, the world outside was scary to me. And it became overwhelming to even think about leaving the room without the handler. Now, these words underscore an uncomfortable truth. Escaping the human trafficking is not only the beginning for the victims. Rebuilding one's life actually requires access to therapy, education, financial support, and often safe housing. Now, without systematic support, many survivors relapse into exploitation, or they face other forms of violence and instability. Now, policy interventions are critical, but must be multidimensional. Age verification and platform moderation will help prevent this. New victims from being exposed, but they're also insufficient on their own. Financial oversight, tracking, and halting payments that facilitate human trafficking, that's the essential part that needs to be done. Civil and criminal courts have begun to treat intermediaries, meaning the middle people, including payments, processors, and advertising networks, as accountable to the human traffickers. They are deferred prosecution agreements like the ones with ALO, MindGeek, and high-profile civil settlements establish precedents that create leverage over platforms. Now, these legal tools have become the power to shift the corporate behavior, particularly when the cost of noncompliance is immediate and substantial to their loss of profits. Now, legislation is another piece of this puzzle, okay? Laws like the Texas HB 1181 demonstrate that state laws can enforce age verification without violating their constitutional rights, at least according to the Supreme Court. Now, experts in child protection argue that replication or similar policies at the federal level could actually possibly create a consistent standards nationwide, reducing the patchwork of regulation that the human traffickers like to exploit. At the same time, civil liberties advocate caution that privacy protections must be integrated into age verification systems. Now, ensuring that the data is secure, minimum and purpose limited is essential to be avoided, creating a new vulnerabilities for the public while targeting human trafficking. That's to say that a lot of people were concerned that if their picture is stored into their system, then if their system gets hacked, then those people can use their face to exploit. Now, technology itself is a double-edged sword. AI automation and algorithmic recommendation engines can be abused, as we discussed, to expand exploitation. But the same tools can be harnessed to protect abuse. Now, children learning models that flag potentially harmful content patterns of suspicion, financial transactions, and grooming behavior on social media are now actively used. Nonprofits, governments, and some platforms have begun deploying AI for keeping pace with those that are adapting AI for exploitation. It is continuous arms race, after all, with human oversight still very critical to verify, contextualize, and act on machine-flagged cases. Now, at the heart of all of the survivors, they are non-statistics. They are the experts on what it takes to escape, to heal, and to rebuild. Many become activists, or they become counselors, using their experience to prevent others from being trapped and feeling hopeless. Programs that combine psychological support, vocational training, legal advocacy, and community integration have shown measurable success in reducing into exploitation and improving long-term outcomes. Now, journalistic accounts that center those voices reveal that human consequences behind the statistics and court rulings. They remind us that behind every conviction, every fine, every policy debate are individuals whose lives are often very much altered. Now, global collaboration is also very critical in this. Trafficking networks are international. Law enforcement agencies, NGO, and governments must coordinate to track, investigate, and prosecute operations that cross borders. Recent joint operations in Europe, North America, and Southeast Asia have demonstrated that synchronized interventions can disrupt both sexual exploitation and human organ trafficking operation networks. Sharing intelligence, aligning financial oversight, and standardizing investigative protocols globally increase the likelihood of successful dismantling of human trafficking and organ trafficking operations. International treaties and agreements will play an essential role in creating an accountability and reducing safe havens for traffickers and reducing the safe havens for them. Now, the public's role, what should they play? They should not be underestimated. Awareness, compliance, education, and online safety and media literacy can reduce the pool of potential victims, meaning talking about the crimes like we're doing right now and posting about them as well. It helps reduce it because any little bit will help other people understand what these crimes are evolving and how they operate. Now, responsibility consumption of content is part of that equation. Viewers must understand that real human lives are cost and are behind the screen that they're looking at, videos and live content that they're viewing. Public pressure has already influenced corporate behavior. One executive says that they see the rest of the turning a blind eye exceeds profit margins. Policies will shift. Look, this is not therapeutical. It is already happening. Hypothetical. It is already happening. Civil settlements, regulatory scrutiny, and public backlash are gradually forcing platforms to improve moderation and reduce exposure of minors. And this includes credit card companies. Now, finally, professional and amateur journalism itself is a crucial tool. Investigators' reporting shines light into spaces that human traffickers prefer to keep dark, from online platforms to the hidden operations of exploit organ marketing. By documenting survivors' testimony, court cases, and financial trails, and law enforcement actions, journalists create a record that can inform public debate, policy making, and enforcement. Stories that humanize survivors illuminate the legal and technological complexities, and hold institutions accountable, create pressure that this is often more effective than the legislation alone. Now, in the end, the solution is not a simple solution. Technology cannot be removed. It cannot behave, and human behavior will always remain unpredictable. But the combination of survivor-centered care, robust legal enforcement, financial accountability, big word on financial accountability, that needs to be really boldly thrown out there. Technology, monitoring, and public awareness can create real measurable impacts. It is a slow process, incrementing, requiring patience, persistence, and coordination across multiple sectors. Yet, progress can be seen and is visible. Courts are holding perpetrators accountable. Platforms are adapting verification measures, and survivors are increasingly able to reclaim their lives and go after the agencies. Now, this is why I continue to report and blog and talk about human trafficking and organ trafficking, because behind every single live stream, every single transaction, every single algorithm recommendation that you get, there are real human lives at stake. Women and children are being put in cages. They are being locked up on cargo ships right now as you sit here. They are real human slaves today, not yesterday, not a century ago, not yesterday, not tomorrow, today. And really, they are actually being sold and auctioned off today as you're sitting here. It is going on. Now, some readers may see a headline and think just to internet content, right? But the record that the survivors in the court filings and NGO reports tells a completely different story. It is a story of systematic exploitation that is being accelerated by technology, sustained by indifference, and only countered by the combined efforts of justice and advocacy and the awareness of a sexual abuse. And for those who ask why stricter access measures or platforms oversight are necessary, consider this. The question is not about limiting your freedom. It is about protecting lives. Every stream viewed without oversight, every transaction that is processed without accountability, and every single algorithm that is being left unexamined or ignored, this is increasing the risk that someone will be trapped, coerced, harmed, and trafficked, and sold while they operate, and to ensure that survivors are supported, not abandoned once they actually escape. Now, the challenge is ongoing, but the path forward is clear. Without coordinated effort, the technology that amplifies exploitation can also be harnessed. and to prevent it. Platforms can enforce age verification and moderation practices. Governments can strengthen cross-border collaboration. Financial institutions monetize their transactions linked to human trafficking, and often, importantly, survivors can be supported in reclaiming their lives. These are the levers that we have. Using them is not optional. It's something that we must learn to do. Now, writing this story, every time that I go and I sit down to write out these stories, because this is one that I would normally post on my news blog that I'm turning into at OTT, to listen to survivors, and you listen to the investigations and you read them as cyber experts and documentaries, and you listen to the news interviews, podcast interviews, I am reminded that visibility actually does matter. That porn streams are not harmless. Every click, every transaction, every view can have real-world consequences. While technology and online platforms have the potential to facilitate harm, they offer tools at the same time to prevent it. It is not simply a narrative of good versus evil anymore. It is a complete ecosystem of human behavior, technology, acceleration, and legal accountability, and moral responsibility of the general population. The stakes have never been higher, because the stakes are human lives. And for those paying attention, the imperative is clear now. Act with urgency. Center survivors, hold platforms accountable. Hold on. And never assume that what happens online and behind the screens are invisible. These days, everything has windows in them, it seems. So be safe out there, everyone. One last thing. The digital age has transformed many aspects of our lives. But it has also introduced new avenues for sexual exploitation. As consumers, we must be vigilant, report suspicious activities, and support organizations, and report the organizations running it. And you must learn to support organizations that are working to combat the human trafficking. My allergies are going off the chain, man, with the weather. Okay, as a society, we must advocate for stronger relations, better enforcement, and comprehensive support for systems and survivors. Now, human trafficking is not a distant problem. It is happening in our communities, facilitated by the very technology we use daily. It is time for us to confront this issue head on, ensuring that the digital realm becomes a space of safety and connection of exploitation. And I don't think that people understand the level of how bad this stuff really is, and how bad this stuff is really getting. Before I read this last part I wrote, the reason why I was so adamant in my writing about this is, again, because that one girl's court case, when I was going over human trafficking and organ trafficking, I looked at her court case, and that's why I've read it the way, because it's very hard to read and to understand how so many thousands of viewers seen that, and they just thought it was part of that. And that's what I'm saying. That's why it's such a dangerous thing that we're doing here. You don't know if it's a victim or not that you're looking at. So let's say that you log into Pornhub or OnlyFans or Xhamster or Camster or I don't know, whatever the sites there are, and you're watching whatever you're watching, and it says lesbian, like I said in the court case, when I was reading with the court case stuff, and it says lesbian BDSM, and you're seeing two girls basically, and one of them looks like they're overpowering the other one and fighting and smacking her around and pulling her hair, right? Now, there's 7,000 people watching that happen, thinking that that was just part of their role play, that was just part of their fetish. But it turned out that was an underage girl who actually tried to tell them that it's not a game. And they didn't even notice that. while the abuse continued. And then they reshared it thousands of times. Now, the reason why I'm bringing that up is because we all have children, right? Ask yourself that question. You know what I mean? Because we're not talking about Playboy. We're not talking about Penthouse. We're not talking about one of those adult porn sites that are like big time, big league that we all know, like Hustler and Centerfolds or whatever, you know. Nowadays, people are literally just uploading it themselves. Or cam sites have made it to where every other house, they're estimating. I went over one year, I was doing human trafficking research, and I went over how they're estimating that 1 in every 5 houses in a residential neighborhood is actually operating an adult cam site. Now, because of the amount of other people that's involved in streaming themselves in pornography with one another underneath the guise of being amateur, and so many people doing it, that these companies are basically, they're coercing them to do more. They're not like telling them, we want to see you do this, or we want to see you do that. They're coercing them because they say, if you want to make more money, we need you to step up this. So, like, you know, they have ways of documenting how many times they hit this or that, and that's how they make their money. And this is making them want to do more extreme activity. Now, as somebody who has studied true crime, anthropology, history, human culture my whole life, you have to understand that this is dangerous, because now you have a influx of very dangerous types of people out there, and you're starting to get new dangerous types of people because they're getting dangerous, and they're feeling like they have to become more extreme to get more views, to get more money, which makes it blurry because you can't tell what's an act and what's not. So what I'm saying is, why I'm so adamant about this stuff is, if back in the day, like, granted, I'm not saying go to a porn site, but if you went to like playboy.com, you know that the chances are very low that the girl is a victim of human like trafficking, abuse, and all that. You know what I'm saying? Meanwhile, if it's just some random person uploading a video on a porn site, you don't know if that is the same case. It could be somebody. And often people, nonetheless, it turned out that it was victims of human trafficking crimes that people were watching over and over again and resharing. And it wasn't an act that people saw. That's why when I did the organ trafficking, human trafficking, that I discussed with Mal so much about how I put emphasis on, it might look like a hotel room. They might even make it look like an office. They might make it look like this or that. But in actuality, they're human slaves being forced to do whatever. And if you really look at the bigger picture, you'll often see computers off in the background with somebody else standing there. That's normally their handler. It's a crazy, crazy dark world. And yes, that's why I'm saying we need stricter measurements. Now, I get it. Now, everybody wants all the information out there. But like me and my wife are discussing it. I feel like the only person that really has a problem with their facial recognition scan are people that don't want their significant others to find out that they're on them, or sexual human traffickers. And that's why I say, you know what, I'm for it. Because if you're going to go to it, then yeah, you're playing, you know what you're doing. So I am for that. I think that they need to have stricter policies on cam sites. If we're going to have amateur porn sites, we need to have stricter laws to make sure that they're not human trafficking, that they're not sexual slaves, that they're not victims. Why do I say sexual slaves? And I know that's a tough word for people to hear now, because that drives a point home. What is a slave? Somebody who is bought and being forced and coerced to do something against their will, right? Underneath the guise of housing and food, right? That is literally what we went over in the court case, what the victim said. Therefore, that is human slavery. And that's why I thought this episode was so crucial. And I apologize for my punctuation. I do have a problem with speech. I always have. I've been working on that my whole life. And that's why, out of respect, I try to spell certain words. But however, this has been Mike from Mike's Certain Thoughts. Oh, the next episode will be a Christian-based episode, but I hope everybody will pay attention. I actually think that everybody will benefit from it. I'm not going to announce what it is just yet. I wanted to just now, and I realized I shouldn't. But it's going to be something that not just Christian and Jewish brothers and sisters, and even Muslims, can relate to. It's something that every single person will be able to relate to. And it will be like my last one. It would be like a whole Christian biblical lesson podcast style. And it's closer than ever for me to start doing a Jesus special. You guys heard that right. So with that being said, this has been Mike from Mike's Random Thoughts. Oh, listen to this. Remember this, okay? We're going to end with the Bible verse as always. Have nothing to do with fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. That's Ephesians chapter 3, verse 11. Everybody, this has been Mike from Mike's Random Thoughts. Everybody have a great day. And remember, stay vigilant. If you see something suspicious, think about it. Do something about it. Like report it or do what you have to do, because, like I said, there are real victims going on every single day, and there are thousands of them at one time. Again, this has been Mike from Mike's Random Thoughts. Everybody have a great night. I'll see you guys real soon.